Hello everyone, I'm Brittany, and today for my presentation I'm going to be discussing language that was used in a local Fort Wayne news coverage of the May 29th, 2020 Black Lives Matter or the George Floyd protest. To begin, this is my introduction. I would like to go over my table of content and just give you a preview of everything that I will be discussing today. First I'll be talking about the gas and cedar section that I have chosen, and then I will present my artifact along with a timeline for this artifact. Then we will be going into the establishing framework. Everything that is listed right there under that is just works cited, the academic sources that I use to help craft this framework. Lastly, we'll talk about the importance of this presentation and my personal interest, and then a conclusion. Just a little heads up though, for the artifact, I do have the video on here, but I'm just going to put the link to the video in the description just because it's a little too lengthy to be showing this entire time. So let's begin. First off, for the gas and cedar section, I chose Chapter 7, Language and Persuasion. So to begin, defining connotative and denotative meaning. So a connotative words that are offered secondary meaning and influenced by surrounding context. And then a denotative meaning, it just is like the main literal meaning. Next would be power of labeling, to be sure that labels we use to describe people or things reflect our attitudes about them and affect others' reactions to the people and things labeled. And then we'll talk about symbols. Symbols have no necessary connection to what they represent, although we sometimes seem to forget this. And then making the words appear better. So this news report in general is pretty unbiased, but there were some language used that I felt like could be critiqued in this way. Thus, an example of this is, no one gets fired or laid off anymore. Instead, companies engage in downsizing. So this is the video that my artifact that I am using to help me create this framework with the language from the text. But because of, like I said, timing, I'm not going to show this video in the presentation. I'm just going to link it in the description below. The news article is also where I got most of my information from. If you scroll all the way down on that news article, that's where you're going to find the video, and then the video will start playing. I also put a timestamp of where I had stopped the video when I did my research. Okay, so this is important because it's establishing not only a historical context, but allows us to have a deeper understanding of why this protest and this specific situation happened. So on May 25th, 2020, a man named George Floyd, was a 46-year-old Black American man, was murdered in Minneapolis by Derek Chauvin, a 44-year-old white police officer. And then on May 29th, 2020, and honestly amongst all of the United States, protests were breaking out, but specifically we're looking at the Fort Wayne protests that happened here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. This began around 5 p.m. that day, and it was a peaceful protest. It was very chill and relaxed, nothing crazy was going on. There was really hardly any law enforcement even there at the beginnings of this protest. Later on, around 8 p.m. is when things started to get a little out of hand. This is when it went from being peaceful to more of a, I guess, violent in a sense, as this is when crowds were starting to spill in the streets. This was leading to altercations between Fort Wayne PD and protesters. That also led to tear gas being thrown at the protesters and protesters retaliating and things along those lines. So this is just kind of how everything started, setting the scene for why this artifact exists. So to get into the nitty-gritty, exactly why we're here today, establishing my framework. So again, I looked at the Chapter 7, Language and Persuasion. These are things that came out of that chapter, such as connotative meaning and denotative meaning, labeling, symbols, and making the words appear better. So some examples that I found for each, starting with the connotative action versus denotative meaning. So that kneeling on the streets with hands in the air, the denotative representation of that would obviously be someone being arrested, but the connotative purpose of this, or even the symbolism that could be represented for this meaning, is that they are showing the reasoning behind this entire scenario. So George Floyd was being arrested at the time, which then led to him being put on the ground, and a knee was on him, and the kneeing is actually what caused his death because it blocked his airways, and such forth. So this is one of their symbols that they use specifically when they're representing George Floyd, to show that they are like behind him and against the police brutality. Labeling. So again, like I said, this was kind of an unbiased representation of this media, but there were still some things in there that I thought could be critiqued, such as the use of using terms like protesters and then separating it with groups. So the news reporter only labeled the protesters as protesters like once in the video, and then he just labeled it as groups. I don't know if there was any reason behind this. I don't know if it was just to keep it separated from like the original protest to then what had happened after, because then things like started to segment, or if it was more to dismantle the importance of what the situation was, and that was protesting. So there are some things there that could be interpreted. Another thing that this news reporter said specifically was that he was born and raised there. I found that quite interesting because I almost felt like he was labeling the situation as like, this isn't what my hometown is like. I'm from here and I've never seen this before. This is so out of the ordinary. So I felt like that was really interesting and something that should be interpreted, especially when looking at labeling. Next, symbols. We already talked about the kneeling on the streets and how that kind of ties them together. Another one was standing in the streets for 7 minutes. So that was supposed to represent the time that he was without oxygen, George Floyd. Again, symbols are something that we as society give meaning to, and that's what we were giving meaning to by standing in the street. Standing in the street for 7 minutes couldn't mean anything before that, but now we have created a meaning for it and an importance. Making the worst appear better. Again, this is pretty unbiased, but some things that I noticed were like, this news reporter informed the audience about throwing trash at the police officers, which then led to the police tear gassing. Again, there are two sides to this entire story. I remember like seeing multiple like news articles and like reading Twitter at the time when this was going down. This news report did mention that there were pepper spraying the protesters when they got into the streets, and then that's what led to this chaos with the throwing the trash and then the tear gassing and the canisters, like, you know, harming people and everything like that. So again, it's kind of that two sides to every story type thing. Who's in the wrong here? And then the groups just despairs instead of not going home. I felt like this was kind of inferring that they were neglecting and ignoring police like authority. So again, kind of just that situation of making the worst appear better. And then the importance of this. So Black Lives Matter movement is very important to the United States and just all around. African Americans, specifically in America, have faced a lot of discrimination and racism for many, many centuries, and even with things like the Civil Rights Movement happening with like Martin Luther King Jr. and stuff like that. Unfortunately, these scenarios still happen, especially when it comes to like police brutality, something along the lines of imbalance in authority. My personal interest in this is specifically just because I witnessed this situation happening. I was only like 19 at the time and living in Fort Wayne, and this just all broke out. This was also during COVID, when COVID had just first happened, and this is just a very historical moment that I feel like has so much powerful information that not even I could decode in just one single presentation. So I think that is really important to research this topic, learn more about this topic, and understand this topic. Overall, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation. I hope this was informative and fun to watch. Again, thank you so much. And then underneath here is my works cited, all the academic sources that I used. Thank you.